Energy Switch is the popular point-counterpoint show where two leading experts with different perspectives discuss the most pressing energy and climate issues in the news today. Coming up on Energy Switch, different perspectives on energy subsidies.
Funding for Energy Switch was provided in part by the University of Texas at Austin.
In some way, all energy is subsidized. That helps support energy infrastructure and development, with the intent of benefiting consumers. But we pay for it, mostly in deficit spending. These include tax credits for producers and investors, direct payments, standards, and mandates for low-carbon technology, accelerated expense schedules for oil and gas, and R&D funding. If you want to know energy, you need to know energy subsidies. My expert guests help unpack them. Jonathan Lesser is the president of Continental Economics, an energy economics consultancy, and a senior fellow at the National Center for Energy Analytics.
The Goldman Sachs estimate from 2023 was $1.2 trillion in the first 10 years. In the long run, it depends on what did you get for all this money that you've spent. My own view is for a lot of it, you're not going to get anything.
Ryan Kellogg is also an economist, professor and deputy dean at the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy, and a research associate at the National Bureau for Economic Research.
This is a large amount of federal budget expenditure.
Right.
And it's uncertain because the total amount of a lot of these tax credits in the IRA are indeed uncapped.
I'm Scott Tinker, and I'm an energy scientist. Next on Energy Switch, we'll dig into energy subsidies. Really looking forward to this. It's a huge topic, and probably one that not everybody knows too much about. So why should our viewers care about subsidies? Ryan, just start with you.
Pretty much every country in the world uses them, and they play a big part in how society meets its goals for energy, which I tend to think of as revolving around people wanting energy to be low cost. Mm-hmm. We want it to be reliable. You flip the switch, the power should be there, and we want it to not harm the environment.
Right.
And subsidies play a role in trying to meet any one or perhaps all three of those goals at once.
That's a tough triangle. A lot of trade-offs in
That's
that
the
world.
nut.
People should care about subsidies because we're spending literally trillions of dollars on them, and it's money we don't have. I have to disagree a little with Ryan because a lot of it is not the kind of subsidy you'd want, which is how do we advance technology, but it's more, how do I claim my subsidy? So you have people actually trying to steer their business to capture a subsidy. And that's not very efficient.
Interesting. Let's get into it. What energies are subsidized, just in a broad sense, and what do those subsidies look like?
Most forms of energy have, at least in this country, have some form of subsidy. There's three major categories. There's tax expenditures, which deals with adjustments to the tax code in some way. There's direct expenditures, which just, here's some money. And then there's R&D expenditures. And that's how the Energy Information Administration actually characterizes subsidies.
Okay. What's a production tax credit? What does that mean?
Let's say I'm a new, say, solar producer. For every unit of energy I produce, every megawatt hour, I'm going to receive a tax credit on the order of $30. And effectively what that does is it reduces my tax liability to the federal government by $30. So it's not quite literally the government handing me a pile of cash, but effectively it's
pretty close.
It's pretty close. I think the one difference being if I don't have enough tax liability, I need to basically transfer or sell that tax credit to some other entity that has enough tax liability to go ahead.
And I can sell that to somebody else? Or
you can sell that to somebody else.
It's tradable?
So pre-IRA, you'd have to form a financial partnership with some other entity. This was called tax equity financing.
Okay.
Post-IRA, they smooth the process by which those tax credits can be transferred.
Interesting.
And if, let's say, you're a developer and you're a nonprofit or a government, so that you don't have any tax liability by construction, you actually now get direct paid.
Wow. Compare a production tax credit to an investment tax credit.
Well, an investment tax credit is basically money off the top of your construction cost. And in fact, it can go up as high as 60% of what's called the overnight capital cost. And what that means is the capital cost without including all the financing costs.
Right. And that, again, is for any project that meets certain criteria.
You have to pay prevailing local wages when you build the facility, and you need to be located in what's defined as an energy community, which sort of typically means some combination of like some local unemployment, a lot of historic fossil fuels that people are sort of worried about what happens as we phase out fossil fuels, what happens to those jobs and those workers. So, and you get bonus credits for that.
And is there a cap to the amount of money you can actually get, or is it 30 to 60% of whatever you just spent?
It's uncapped. It's uncapped. So they will phase out when electricity sector emissions targets are met, which in the context of the IRA means we reduce emissions to 25% of, I think it's 2020 levels. So a 75% reduction.
And until that happens, you just keep getting them.
Yeah, anything built new will be eligible.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, whatever you build, if you elect the ITC.
It is real money
real
indeed.
money.
Yeah. Is that independent of anything they might get from the states?
Yes, it would be completely independent of anything from the states.
So let's get into another renewable portfolio standard, another kind of, is that a subsidy? What is it?
So what it is, it's a requirement that electric utilities or in deregulated states, retail sellers of electricity, provide service with a minimum percentage of renewables that they say are qualifying renewables. States don't define renewables all the same. Pennsylvania, for example, you can burn used tires. That counts as renewable. Of course, it's a kind of subsidy, a mandate to essentially buy something, whether it's an electric vehicle or it's electricity that's generated by a solar plant or burning tire plant. That's a subsidy.
So let's talk about mandates. It's been mentioned a couple of times. Is a mandate a subsidy? Electric vehicles, for example. Is that a subsidy?
I mean, I would think of it as just a massive tax on whatever the thing you're trying to get rid of is. So if it's a mandate for EVs, which the federal government doesn't have, but California does, or we'll see if it sticks. That's a separate question, but that's kind of the equivalent of an infinite tax on a gas car.
If I'm being told I have to buy one, does that go back to something
you're not being told you have to buy one. You're being told you can't buy a gasoline car.
So
that's the
you
distinction.
can either ride your bike, walk,
ride your bike, take transit, carpool with somebody who bought the EV, these other things.
Look, this is a subsidy. You're forcing people, basically saying, if you want to buy a new car, it's going to be one of these. So.
Mandates, I mean, tell me again if I'm oversimplifying. Mandates tend to reduce options. Optionality seems to me to be what markets like.
That's right.
What happens when we start reducing options? What are some of the consequences of that?
One consequence is consumers are worse off because, a lot of the arguments are, for example, for EVs. Well, they're superior technology. They're getting lower costs than gasoline engines. They're easier to maintain. They're just the most wonderful thing since sliced bread.
Right.
Great. Why does it need a subsidy?
Right.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with the skepticism. The reason that when you look at federal policy, it's about subsidies and trying to promote EVs, but without a mandate. Because Congress knows full well that people don't want a mandate, and the country just simply isn't ready for an EV mandate.
Except there is a mandate for EVs now at the federal level. It's implicit. It's the CO2 standards the EPA has imposed on new gasoline-powered vehicles.
Yeah, is that
a
sneaky mandate or what?
I don't know. I mean, I'd call that a fleet standard. I don't know if I'd call that a mandate, because the people who have really strong preferences to buy a standard internal combustion engine vehicle will be able to do so. The people who want to switch to an EV will be able to do so. Is the standard going to be realistic and achievable? I don't know. I think a lot's going to depend on progress commercially with EVs.
We also hear oil and gas gets heavy subsidies. What does that mean, and what form does that take?
Yeah, the oil and gas subsidies we have on the books are fairly modest. I'd say the biggest one right now, and it really costs a few $1 billion a year, is basically advantageous expensing of most drilling costs. For the most part, when companies in the U.S. make an investment, they're going to build some new equipment or build a new factory, whatever it is, you spend a bunch of money up front. And then for tax purposes, you can't deduct that expense off your tax bill right away. You have to treat it as an asset, and then you depreciate that asset over a very long period of time, which means your tax deductions are out in the future, which means they're worth less to you.
Sure.
Oil and gas, for a very long time now, has allowed much more accelerated expensing of investment, which I would argue is potentially reasonable policy you'd want across the board. And the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that was passed under Trump several years ago actually did that for a time.
Accelerated basically depreciation of the asset.
Almost immediately or over a very short period of time. As it currently stands and how it's been for the most part, with the exception of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act period, oil and gas industry has kind of had an exception for itself carved out.
No, you'll literally hear political leaders say it's the most heavily subsidized industry in the country. What does that mean? What do they... I mean, is it just not telling the truth, or what does that mean?
I think when you hear that, I think what is meant is that what we allow fossil industries to do is not pay for the cost of the CO2 emissions that are associated with the combustions of their product.
By other industries.
By other industries or by end-use consumers. We're not requiring them to, say, pay a carbon tax commensurate with an estimate of the damages associated with climate change.
Is that what people mean by an externality?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we're not requiring them to pay for the externality.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the IRA. What are some of the new subsidies and incentives in that program, and what are they intended to do?
Obviously, there's continuation of existing subsidies like the production tax credit, the investment tax credit. Those have been altered, expanded in some sense, but there's new subsidies for green hydrogen.
Green hydrogen being hydrogen made with
the idea of green
water.
hydrogen is hydrogen manufactured by electrolysis, which basically is running current through water to separate it. It's a little more complicated than that. But,
and using solar and wind for the current.
And using solar and wind. So there's up to a $3 per kilogram subsidy for that. There's subsidies for battery technology, subsidies for energy efficiency investment, if you're a homeowner or something. Some subsidies for nuclear. There's a little bit of R&D money. I'm probably forgetting some.
Sure.
I can think of a few others, and there will be some we forget because it's a really massive bill. I do think one very useful change was harmonizing the PTC and ITC across essentially any form of electricity that produces megawatt hours without any emissions. So before the IRA, it used to be that solar was eligible for an ITC but didn't get the PTC. Wind got a PTC, it would sometimes get an ITC. Other things like geothermal weren't eligible for this. New nuclear wasn't eligible for anything. It made no sense. Like, why are we differentiating across technologies? So the IRA, starting January 2025, basically harmonizes that PTC or ITC, basically telling the market, we want clean electricity. Market, you figure out what makes sense and what's cost effective.
It's probably important for people to know that you can't, a generator can't get both the PTC and the ITC. They have to choose.
You can't double dip.
Yeah.
So, kind of lumping it all together, what does it cost? I mean, and how does it actually get paid for?
This is a large amount of federal budget expenditure. And it's uncertain because the total amount of a lot of these tax credits in the IRA are indeed uncapped. The original estimate when the bill passed in 2022 was about $300 billion-ish of federal expenditure. Other estimates more recently suggest it could be up to $1 trillion. To me, I look at those figures and compare that to what I see as prospective damages from climate change. That seems like a good trade to me.
The Goldman Sachs estimate from 2023 was $1.2 trillion in the first 10 years. And on top of that, they didn't include the costs of financing all that, basically debt spending. One of the major things for the IRA is they were talking about economic development. And it's going to create all these green jobs, and somehow our economy will be transformed into this sort of green nirvana economy. But if you actually look at what are those jobs costs? And so I've done some work on offshore wind for this. The amount comes to several $1 million every year for every job created.
Per job?
Per job, per year. All that money is being paid by someone else, typically in the form, a lot of it's higher electric prices. And all the studies you see touting the thousands of jobs created, they never actually count what happens to economic growth and jobs when electricity prices go up. And so that's one of the, I guess, unintended side effects.
Interesting. Other things that could be unintended?
I think in the long run, it depends on, what did you get for all this money that you've spent? My own view is for a lot of it, you're not going to get anything. It's a very expensive and inefficient way of trying to reduce carbon and, advance technologies.
You agree with that or see it different?
I think Jonathan's comments really hit at what I think of as one of the core tensions in the IRA, which is that it's not a bill that's just about decarbonization. It's that plus a clean jobs program bolted onto it.
Okay.
But by doing that, you are effectively saying we're going to forego some emissions reductions that could have been done at lower costs by importing sort of intermediate products or even just end consumer products.
Right.
We're not going to see the cheap Chinese BYD vehicles here anytime, in part because of IRA, in part because of tariffs. But you're going to start seeing them in lots of other places throughout the world, including Europe.
Yeah.
Which for decarbonization is great. But again, the IRA is not just about that. It's bolted onto this industrial policy, and it would not have passed without that.
Right. Given that it's a double thing, it can be lower emissions and reliable, but we're going to pay more.
We're going to pay more. Or you
Okay.
could think of it as, instead of a triangle, you have a, what's it called, a tetrahedron, I think, where you also have this, we want to build it in the US.
Yeah.
Which, doing 3 things at once is hard enough. Now we're going to try to do 4.
Yeah. Okay.
Whew.
Yeah. Okay. How are we doing? Is it working? Is it starting to work? Are we reaching goals?
In a word, no. It's not working. It's inefficient. In my view, it's a complete waste of money. We're essentially spending all this money on the least efficient forms of energy. Wind, solar.
What does that mean, inefficient?
Well, they're not dense. They're not energy dense at all. They take huge amounts of space, which has its own impacts and costs. They're intermittent. For specifically wind and solar, you have the problem of they don't have any inertia for the electric system, which is a problem. Then you have to add tons of storage. That's very expensive. And then there's the whole issue of minerals. So if you want to focus on energy resources, what you want to do is get the most valuable types of energy.
Do you agree with that? Are wind and solar and batteries, whether they're chemical or pumped hydro, is it too expensive?
So here's how I would think about it.
Okay.
Jonathan is absolutely right in that if your goals about energy come down to low cost and reliable,
Right.
fossil fuels are amazing at delivering that. They are energy dense, they're plentiful, they're easy to store, they're easy to move around. The problem, of course, is climate along with other externalities. And then the question is what are we willing to pay to deal with that externality? So when I think about sort of what should we be focusing on, we should be focusing on, deploying technologies that we think are already reasonably mature and actually kind of low cost the way the energy system is currently set up. It's we're kind of at a stage where wind and solar at the levels they're currently being deployed are there. Eventually, we're going to hit a point where we start to have to complement them aggressively with storage or other technologies. And then when it comes to thinking about full global decarbonization, we really need to think about developing technology and business models that other countries, especially low-income countries that are trying to grow their economies, and ideally not do so on a fossil fuel-based path, are going to be willing to sort of take up these technologies. Because, look at India, look at Pakistan. They're desperately trying to grow. They're not going to be terribly interested in sacrificing any of that growth for the sake of the global climate.
Right.
And I can't blame them.
China.
The only way they're going to hold back is if it's going to be relatively cheap for them to do it.
Okay.
So the way I will judge the success of the IRA, and we're not going to know for a while, unfortunately, is if it leads us to not just the development, but also the deployment of technologies and business models and policy models that actually enable that.
Okay.
I don't quite agree with that. I would tend to focus much more on nuclear power. It's not just small modular reactors, which are being developed, but just advanced, APR 1100 reactors, for example.
Those are kind of the big ones we have now.
Those are the newest generation,
of the
fourth
large.
generation nuclear plants, because that way you can avoid a lot of the infrastructure and lower the cost. So if you're not building wind and solar in the far reaches of rural America, then you don't have to build thousands of miles of high voltage transmission lines. You don't have to build battery storage. You can avoid all those costs and have reliable power supply.
And no emissions.
And no emissions. But when the government picks winners and losers, inevitably they pick wrong. And that's been the history of this government for the last half century. I think the government's role is best in promoting true research and development to advance new technologies and lower costs rather than picking, well, we want wind to win, we want solar to win, or, we want green hydrogen to win, whatever.
Right.
No, don't do that. Markets are much better and much more efficient at doing that.
Interesting.
So I'll agree in part and disagree in part.
Okay.
So one, I completely agree that there's tremendous value in the government doing basic R&D research that the private industry tends not to be interested in. We're on board with that. And I think where the tension really comes in is sort of the gap between, hey, here's this idea or technology, like fusion, an idea for a nuclear reactor design, some new way of doing geothermal, whatever it is. It's like an idea that works on a lab bench or something like that. And how do we sort of get the gap between that and something that's actually commercial and scalable? Having the government involved in loans or grants for those stages of innovation and sort of early stage deployment, pilot studies, whatever you want to call it, inevitably you do kind of have to start picking and choosing winners and losers because some ideas get the grants, some ideas won't, and you have to choose.
Right.
But maybe what's better to do then is try small demonstration projects. Can you do it at the local level? Because if you can't do it at the local level, your chance of doing it at the national level is, that's not going to happen either.
Pretty challenging. So let me wrap with this question. What gives you hope? What makes you hopeful in all this?
Oh, I like this question. So we do see costs of, at least some clean technologies coming down. Batteries keep getting cheaper, solar PV keeps getting cheaper. And you look around the world and you start to see evidence of substantial decarbonization. So Norway is almost entirely electric vehicle now. China is something like 30-35%. And you're starting to see at least parts of the world try to figure out how do we have an electricity grid that runs without fossil thermal generation in it. There's a lot to figure out, but the progress we've made over the past 10, 15 years is more than I would have thought.
Nice. Good. How about?
Well, despite being a cynical economist, I think there's an inherent resilience to people. There's kind of especially in this country, an innovative spirit that I don't think is going to be squelched. And if you think technology got us into this mess, that technology is going to get us out. I think that's going to, be our salvation, if you will, in the coming years.
Inherent reliance and innovative spirit doesn't sound so cynical.
Well,
watch it.
Don't tell me.
You might lose your reputation here. Great dialogue. Thank you. Scott Tinker, Energy Switch. Investments from the Inflation Reduction Act are changing. But at the time of this filming, the IRA included a broad range of subsidies for low-carbon energies at a bill that could exceed $1 trillion. Production tax credits and investment tax credits offset the costs of new projects. Oil and gas has been able to deduct its upfront capital expenses, a change that has come to other energies. Portfolio standards, mostly on the state level, require a certain amount of renewables in the mix. But state mandates for EVs reduce access to other options. Subsidies for nuclear, carbon capture, and much more, all low-carbon technologies, are eligible for similar support. Ryan argues that expense could offset what may be even higher costs of climate change. Jonathan counters that the current subsidies are inefficient and support the wrong energies, solar and wind, which are low density and intermittent, instead suggesting more support for nuclear. They agreed that more new energy R&D could be a good place for energy subsidies.
Energy Switch is executive produced by Scott Tinker and produced and directed by Harry Lynch. Emily Hooks is the assistant producer and researcher. Editors are Ginny Patrick, Yusef Swachina, and Jackie Kunzler. Matt Aslanian does the sound. Energy Switch is produced by Arcos Films for the Switch Energy Alliance, with support from the University of Texas at Austin.